Hi there folks, I'm Colin, and over the next few minutes I'm going to be sharing a little bit about this fella. Very interesting. You can go now. The brain. It's an amazing part of our bodies. The organ itself chews up to 20% of our daily energy intake. So yeah, folks, why is it so important to understand what's happening in this part of our bodies? Well, it is the source of our blind spots. We have the blind spots, why we behave the way we do. We have the subconscious. The subconscious itself can control up to 95% of our behavior. Now, that's quite a lot, but let's have a little bit of a look and see how it does do this. So we have the triune brain. This concept was first coined in the 1960s by Paul MacLean, and it's a model that still holds in terms of the broad mapping of the brain. So we have the reptilian complex. Now the reptilian complex, deep in our subconscious, earliest part of our brain. Every animal has the same complex. That's why it's called the reptilian, even the lizards and the crocodiles. And what is this part of the brain doing for us? Well, it's all about survival. Now, this survival, the brain itself ensures our survival. We don't have to think too much about surviving. For example, it controls our hunger, our thirst, our digestive system. It even controls our breathing. Now, imagine if we had to consciously remember to breathe to survive, we wouldn't make it through the night. Now, it also has within it the deep base fears that ensure our survival as humans. Now, these base fears, we will cover at a later stage. But at the end of the day, once upon a time, if we walked out there and we came face to face with a saber-toothed tiger, it would take charge, it takes over us, and even to this day, what it does do is it'll ensure that we either fight, flight, or freeze. Now, in the modern day, that saber-toothed tiger, using it as an analogy, does not necessarily have to be in front of us. What has happened, our brain has evolved quite incredibly. So even imagining or thinking about the saber-toothed tiger or perceiving that it's in front of you when it's not can bring in these automatic responses of fight, flight, freeze. So our subconscious can really overwhelm us if we are not aware that maybe it's just a perceived threat, not a real threat. Now, as the brain evolved, it moved from it evolved on top of the reptilian complex. We had the limbic system starting to form. And this is over many millions of years, folks. We're talking a long time ago. And what is the limbic system about? Well, it's all about emotions. And along those emotions, it's also about pain or pleasure. So what it does, it works very closely with the reptilian complex. We have, for example, what happens is it says, well, is this emotion a pleasurable feeling or a painful feeling? And without awareness, what it can do is it can take a painful emotion and want to find something that's more pleasurable to replace that. So, for example, once upon a time, we came across a chocolate cake. Now, we ate that chocolate cake, and with it came the sugar and the carbohydrates, and the body goes, wonderful, this is food, it's survival. But what it also does with the emotion of pleasure as we eat that sweet sugary substance, we associate that with pleasure, and we go, I must remember this. The brain goes, I must remember this the next time, because not only is it pleasurable, it feeds me, it gives me some sustenance. So when I'm feeling some pain at another point in time, it goes, do you remember when you ate that cake? You felt more pleasure. So what it does is automatically we go and get that chocolate cake, and so emotional eating became something that we mostly can have in our lives. So what it does do without awareness, it can take over our behaviors in this regard. And that is all in the subconscious, the limbic and the reptilian subconscious stuff. Now, as we evolved even later in life, we then developed the neocortex. It stands for new bark, Latin for new bark, and it's that layer that covers the subconscious part of the brain. And yeah, this neocortex is actually the very smart center of our brain. It's the higher brain, so to speak. Now, what you're seeing is a slide. It's the half the brain, but there's a left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And what happens is the smartest part of the brain, smartest part of the neocortex is our prefrontal. It's this area that sits towards the front part of our brain, the frontal lobes. And on the left-hand side is our more logical, more reasoning side of the brain. It's where we are less, people who are in this part of the brain or work mostly with this part of the brain tend to be less reactive to stress, and if they do face stressful situations, what they end up doing is recovering a lot more quicker. On the right prefrontal cortex, we actually have a lot more neural pathways into our limbic system. In other words, when you're working more with the right prefrontal, what is happening is we tend to become more emotional. So on a positive note, if you go into work, for example, and you're highly engaged, what happens is from the right prefrontal, you actually find more meaning in your work. You get more emotional pleasure out of it. But what can also happen on the downside is if you have too much of this side of the brain, you become very depressed. And we see people through research who are stuck in this space can become highly depressive. There's not too much on the left prefrontal working to help reduce that. So those are just some really interesting concepts around the brain. We will look at a lot more around this, but for now, it's important to just have a little bit of awareness as to these subconscious behaviors, and the tools we provide in Beyond Thinking help us manage this a bit, help us work with more whole brain thinking, and there's lots more to this, folks. So until we chat again, take care and stay aware.